Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. Delighted to be with you today. My name is Ross Tuffee. I'm the founder and CEO of MotionLab Ventures, and also an entrepreneur in residence at the University of Stirling in Scotland. Absolutely delighted to be here with a fantastic panel. I'd like to welcome you to this British Council webinar, where we will be exploring the role of entrepreneurship and how developing an entrepreneurial mindset can help in addressing climate challenges, from launching a new venture to scaling for impact. Hopefully, our conversations will provide you with practical insight into this starting and growing a sustainable business, as well as the wider ecosystem and understanding of that will support innovation. I'm absolutely delighted to have with me three hugely insightful panelists, all of which have really relevant experience in the above. So I'd like to welcome Burak Yazar, co-founder of KomsuBostan, Dan Su, Alumni UK Convener and Create Adept, and Yijing Wang, founder and CEO of 2060, the 2060 Advisory. Let's start by asking our panelists just to introduce themselves. If you could just say who you are, please, what you do, and what really drew you to the climate entrepreneurship space. Shall we start with Burak?
Thank you, Ross, and delighted to be here today. So this is Burak Yazar, co-founder of KomsuBostan, a platform that directly introduces customers to the producers and eliminates the intermediaries in between. So started as a platform, KomsuBostan has grown into a self-growing community thanks to the webinars and impact on the women producers. And it reached around 640 different producers in more than 60 cities in Turkey. So it's a very vivid platform. And today I'm delighted to share this experience with you and learn from other panelists as well.
Thank you, Burak. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, thank you, Ross. Thank you, everybody. Really happy to be here. My name is Dan Su. I'm from Create Adapt. I've been working with Alumni UK climate action community of practice for the last year or so, which has been incredibly exciting. My background is I'm British Chinese, based in London. I'm a facilitator, educator, and creative director with, I guess, broad experience that crosses creative economy, social action, and youth development. And yeah, really excited to share some of the insights that we've had from building a climate action community of practice.
Thank you, Dan. And Yijing, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Yijing and I'm based in Hangzhou, China. It's a city next to Shanghai, and there's a lot of tech, particularly AI with DeepSeek and Alibaba. So for 2060 Advisory, we mostly focused on climate investing and impact investing. So we support both of the communities. One is on the climate technologies, and then the other one is all the different types of impact fund and climate funds. And so we'd love to share more later. Thanks.
Yijing, thank you very much indeed. And as you can see from our panel, we've got a real breadth of experience, and very much looking forward to the conversations over the next 55 minutes or so. But before we do that, let's start with a poll. If I could ask for the poll to be put up there, thank you very much. If you could, those that are listening in and watching in, please, can you just spend the next 30 seconds or so having a look at this and answering this poll, and then we'll have a look and see in terms of who's on the call today, what sort of interest is there. Aha, here we go. So that's an interesting split. So we've got people across all the different spaces, particularly looking at exploring careers. So hopefully we'll be able to give you a little bit of insight into the career journey or the options around this, and they are broad, so that's good news. Some people looking at they've got ideas, so always interested in people with ideas. and I'm building and launching a venture. That's great. So we've got some practitioners amongst us. That's fantastic. Anyone who's on the call today, we will have some questions towards the end. So if you've got questions, please can you put them into the Q&A, and we'll have a bit of time towards the end of the second half of the conversation to have a look at that. The other area of spike, I think there was, okay, we just lost that off the screen, but never mind. Let's now look at the second poll. So if we could have the second poll up, please. Fantastic. So what's your biggest challenge? So is it finding that idea, finding that initial idea? Is it building the right skills to deliver that idea? Is it finding funding? I'd be surprised if that's not one where people are interested. Is it about collaboration and finding co-founders or collaborators to work with? Is it about understanding where you start? So just tell me where I might, or give me some hints on where to start. Or is it about building confidence? What's your biggest challenge? Let's have a look at that next. Okay, interesting. So not too many people challenged with finding ideas. That's not surprising. People have lots of ideas. It's whether you can move that into action that is the challenge often. Building the right skills. Skills are important. Finding funding, again, important. So all of these, finding collaborators, that's really interesting. We've got a good spread here. Not so many people need to build confidence. We've got obviously a lot of confident people on the call, which on the webinar, which is really good. So I think we've got a nice spread there of what the challenge is, what challenges people are facing. So hopefully over the course of the next few minutes, we'll be able to answer some of your questions. If you don't see the answer coming through, please put a question in the Q&A. There's a chance to upvote the questions as well. So if somebody has put a question already into the Q&A and you think it's one that you'd like to hear the answer to, please keep an eye on that and upvote it, because I'll be starting at the top and working my way through those questions. Fantastic, great. So we've got a good idea who's what the sort of interests are on the call, and I think what we'll do is we'll crack on and have a bit of start of the conversation really around that kind of getting started. So let's talk about how do you find opportunities and how might you get started? So I'm going to start with a question which Yijing will start the conversation with you. If you were finishing university today, what would you do in your first 12 months to move into climate entrepreneurship?
Thank you for the question. So I could probably go with from two sides. One is what we mostly looked on, and where do we find the good kind of climate tech companies, and so maybe that's like a source of ideas, but also in practice, like what we are really seeing in the industry, but also another aspect on what I would be doing. So for the first part, so right now, because a lot of climate solutions and sustainability solutions, we kind of put them into two baskets. One is really like tech-driven innovations. For instance, we work with hydrogen, different types of, storage energy, battery systems, different, cell systems. And if it's renewable materials, it's really like deep tech into material science. And so if that's like where you would be interested, I would recommend you to look into more science-based big corporates. What are they innovating? As well as actually being in school, it's a really good resources to go and talk to, or the engineering department, or like all the different types of department. There's already research and studies that different professors are already working on with different labs. And probably you could also go beyond your own school. If if you're based in large cities, you could also go and chat, and then many of the schools also have incubators as well. So I would say like that would be a really good starting point. The other side of the sustainability business, usually, let's say for circular economy, thematic startups or business, these ones usually are more business driven. And so this, for instance, like the kind of circular economy startups that we work with, mostly are already in the industry, and then they see a market opportunity or a gap in the market or industry. And then these people kind of come out to fill that business or the gap. And so if you're like more interested in those ones, probably the good ones is going into a particular industry. For instance, if you look into agriculture waste, go talk to people in agriculture industries and then see if there's food waste in the value chains, wherever that stage within that value chain is. And so that's like where we kind of like would go into and look. And personally, if right now I am just graduating and then trying to think where I would be looking into, definitely there's so much climate related networks existing globally already. We in the industry, like let's say next week is London Climate Week. I know a lot of people seems like hugely, like advanced, and that these are like the people in the industry for 20 years or so or something. But I definitely recommend you to be going into these events and then going into those industry peoples and just talk to people and get data point of, like where you should be looking at.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Let's move on to our next question then. So, Burak, if someone doesn't want to sort of found their own startup yet, and it's not for everyone, what are the best ways to work in this space and still have an impact?
That's a great question, and I think my experience is pretty relevant to that in the regard that I believe KomsuBostan has never been a startup. From the early days, we've been a social enterprise. We had some ventures, so to say, to work on a hybrid model, which I can explain later on. But I want to today a little bit talk about the difference between the social enterprise and the startup and how our experience can be related to that. So our, the idea that we developed started as a very basic, started with a very basic question. A product that was produced in the field with X amount of Turkish lira, how it ended up with being on the market for 8X, right? What happened to that difference? And that was a real problem, first of all. The second part is the real problem had a thing to do with the stakeholders, right? Stakeholders meaning producers and customers. So stakeholders part is pretty important because in a startup, you mostly talk about the shareholders, right? But in a social enterprise, what you care also about is your stakeholders, and you aim to grow with them in a sustainable environment. And growth is in a startup is, about racing and then scaling. Whereas in a social enterprise like ours, we grew as well, right? In terms of numbers, 300 producers in the first year. It was a huge achievement. We've been in more than 20 cities in the first year. And this was the metrics that everyone was looking at. But at the same time, we grew with our producers and customers. And we got emails from the producers that thanking us, they were introduced to new customers. So I think this is how you can think about a social enterprise. And, obviously when you talk about a social enterprise, you talk about the triple bottom line, right? Like 3 Ps: people, profit, and planet. Whereas in a regular startup, you might be thinking about just one financial profit side. So it doesn't mean that one is wrong, the other is right. There could be hybrid methods as well, and we tried also the hybrid methods with a commission-free marketplace. But again, it might give you a time to test your ideas, the social enterprise. And then if you're ready to scale off fully, and then you can move on with hybrid models or the startup models.
Cool, thanks. I guess with what you're saying there, so that's the breadth of types of business or types of organization. So, and you could, as an individual, you could go and join one of those and get that experience. So you don't have to found it. You could actually go along and join it and get that experience. Personally, I founded my first company at 42. So I'm 58 now, actually 59, sorry, 59 now. So I was quite late in life, but so you can go and join a climate business. Well, it's a social enterprise which maybe follow your passion, or indeed a for-profit company which has purpose. There's still for-profit companies that have strong impact and strong purpose there. So thank you for that, Burak. That's really interesting. Starts to open up the conversation about types of businesses, types of organization to achieve impact. So Dan, I want to talk to you now just about what role do networks, alumni communities, and partnerships play in getting ventures off the ground?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you to my fellow panelists, because I think there's some really important points there. And I think just to piggyback off what Burak was saying, I think when we start thinking about stakeholders in the social context, really what we begin to think about is the mechanisms that people can coalesce and create communities and really come together for kind of unified purpose, really. And so this is where Alumni UK's the seed pod, we called it, which was essentially a diverse network rooted in the Alumni UK network of people who shared a commitment to driving climate action through cultural, creative, and community-based approaches. And so what that meant in practice was that we had 20 incredible organizations from 12 countries around the world, ranging from Nigeria to Pakistan to Germany to Indonesia. And it was really united by connecting change makers across countries and growing a global network. Why is this important? Well, I think it's fundamentally important for sharing, learning, and problem solving. Realizing that yes, we have a lot of ideas, but if you dig deeper, you'll probably find that there's no truly new ideas, i.e. what I'm saying is that you can learn from other people's experience and other people's mistakes maybe and other people's successes. And I think the importance of having networks and alumni communities is it creates a safe space for people to play, to talk, to connect. And this work is hard. We're trying to do things for universal social good, but at the same time, it's dispersed across a global network. And so the challenge becomes, how do you bring people together to share these kind of diversity of learning, knowledge, and experience? I'm just very quickly going to share my screen to exemplify a little bit of what it was. So essentially the Seed Pod was a monthly set of workshops with WhatsApp communities and masterclasses. So it was a mixture of synchronous, so coming together at a specific time like we are now, and asynchronous, so people coming together at their own time. So for example, a WhatsApp chat. And we kind of broke it down into three kind of parts of a journey, chapters, if you like. One part was the ground, so setting the soil, connecting as a community, really celebrating existing work. But then as we moved forward together over the course of a year, we were really working across diversity, working across difference, building that community, but also having shared learning around green skills for the future. So we would have masterclasses come in from people like Julie's Bicycle, based in the UK, In Place of War, who set up Earth Sonic, Bless Indonesia, who run amazing climate action projects in Indonesia, and so on and so forth. And then finally, the question now is, how do we sustain these skills for climate action? And we're talking about networking, we're talking about advocacy, and also one of the reasons I'm here is, how do we open this out to a wider community so that we can benefit from new skills, new experience, but also ground it in the established community that continues to grow. So as an example, I would say that the networks are hugely important for this globally connected future that is so important to make climate action realistic.
Brilliant. That's a really interesting model, and I'm sure we'll continue to talk about that as we continue forward. That model can be applied not just to climate action, but can be applied across other areas, which I think is really important to think about too. So, but thank you for that, Dan. I'm going to ask my next question. I'm actually going to ask my next question to Burak. Burak, when we look at creating organizations, one of the key capitals or the resources that an entrepreneur needs is financial capital. So let's talk about funding strategies. So what are the main funding routes in climate right now in terms of grants, angel investment, impact investment, etc., partnerships, and how should people think about them?
Sure. That's another great question. And then I think this question, obviously, there are several things that applies everywhere, right? The angel investment, so on and so forth. But when it comes to the grants or so, it's also important where you're located in and what you're specifically working on, right? So I want to make this distinction before I start. And, I want to also talk about my experience so that, it can relate to what it meant in the real life. So in our case, as a social enterprise, we heavily worked on the grant side, right? And then, first of all, it was for us very beneficial because, first of all, there were a lot of different organizations from UN to British Council to Turkish Crescent that were willing to support our mission, right? And then the good thing about the grants is you don't really give up your equity. And the organizations support you, but at the same time, the trade-off is you write long applications, right? And thanks to AI, maybe it's shortened now. But the other thing is reporting. Once you finalize your project, you create some reporting. And then the other trade-off is you're limited in what you are using with these funds for. Obviously, there is a agreed purpose, and then you're spending the funds over there. But I think it is very considerable for social enterprises to apply for grants, and it could be EU grants, it could be UN grants, British Council grants. We received one of them for COP26 back in 4 years. So this could be the first thing, right? The second thing is, I think, incubation hubs. Incubation hubs are great for funding in the long term and networking. And then, to me, networking and funding, they're all important because networking could bring you funding in the long term. So what incubation hubs does, obviously you provide a pitch and then they select you or the other enterprise or the other startup. And what they offer you is an education throughout a process. Could be a year, 6 months, and then mentorship opportunities. So here you meet with amazing people like you, the startup owners, or the mentors that have done amazing things years ago and try to share the experiences. And then at the end of this incubation periods, some selected startups or the social enterprises are given opportunities to meet with investors and do a final pitch, right? And then we've done this in Turkey at İTÜ Çekirdek, which is Istanbul Technical University's seed organization. So, and then the other organizations as well. And then what happened was we met with amazing investors. So, it's then your choice what to think about the equity, what to think about the next steps are. And the last thing I want to discuss is, obviously, there are many other opportunities, but I want to select some of them based on my experience as well so that it can relate to the audience. The partnerships. So the partnerships can be with corporate companies, is. As you know, you're in climate, and most of the companies want to have an aim in their business, and then they have specific funds or foundations that you can really work on with. The other partnership type is those individuals that might be willing to work with you or have similar projects that might be interested in the both stakeholders. And we had a great example with this. We work with we work with a very important physician in Turkey who was very much into this entrepreneurship side. And then this partnership opened up as a new sustainability webinar that we invited with the UNDP Goodwill Ambassador for Turkey. So it's all about networking, and then comes with funding as well. So it's a very, conglomerated approach.
Thank you. No, that's really interesting and very broad. Let's continue to build on that. Yijing, one of the challenges here is, how do founders balance impact and commercial viability without losing either? Because it can be very easy to lose each of those. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's actually a really difficult question. And then in academic, actually, like there's so much kind of research that goes into for social enterprise and impact investing. How do you actually balance that? And in real practice, because I am also an entrepreneur myself for our own firm, and then you would understand this is not just like a financial kind of difficulties in terms of balance, but also every single decision, whether like you're with your team, and then who do you approach in terms of like clients, and then how do you engage with your stakeholders. So it's a very holistic challenge. And so it's really tough. But from like where we look at, so if it is a company and your technology and your business model have a positive correlation between the more impact you make and the more profit you make, and the more profit you make, more impact you make. If that correlation in terms of like the modeling is positive correlation, then that's like the kind of like the kind of model, and that's where we want to be. So I'll give an example. So for instance, Patagonia kind of recycle plastic bottles to make their t-shirt. And so the kind of the calculation and the modelings behind it is, if you sell more t-shirt, which you make more profit, then you actually recycle more plastic bottles. And then so that's like positive correlation. And so if you are an entrepreneur in the space, if your business model down to the very fundamental in terms of business model and your impact measurement, if it is positively correlated, then that's the kind of model we want to aim. Of course, that is like a very kind of ideal, but that's not to say not possible. But also like on small decisions, actually, from time to time, it's difficult to kind of balance that. And then from within your kind of entrepreneurial journey, at some point you might need to kind of prioritize. But there's one other thing I want to point out, because I know there's a lot of different countries and regions represented in the audience. And so in some countries, social enterprise and relatively like the model of business, corporate folk, like B corporations, benefit corporations, or different legal entity structures exist. In the countries, then the definition of, like the balance between impact and commercial viability is more easier, because usually there's like a relatively clearer definitions. And so within time to time, you could also get some benefits from that as well. But in many countries, and particularly like developing countries and other countries, most of the globe actually, you don't have a very particular and very clear definitions with legal structures and business structures that you work with. And sometimes you have to prove like I am a social enterprise, although I am registered as an enterprise or business entity. And so from there, like the balance between impact and commercial viabilities, we also see some of the companies have parallel structure. They have one commercial companies as an entity, but also at the same time, they have a nonprofit to go along, and then they kind of depending on the structure of the business segment, and then they kind of do that as well. And that's also like very nobly seen. And so really depends also on your region. You could structure things, but it's, like the underneath the logical from business perspective is the better is to see a positive correlation from our standpoint.
That's really helpful. I mean, first of all, it's a complex question, as you said, it's really hard. But I think when you look at that relationship, often seen as two opposing forces, but actually they can be aligned in terms of impact and profit, as long as that is a purpose-driven and a for impact outcome. So sometimes the legal entities bucket people into different buckets when maybe that's not particularly helpful. But thank you, Yijing. That's really, really helpful. Just sort of finishing off on this area, Dan, when you started talking about communities of practice, etc., and peer networks, how useful are they when we're trying to grow impact?
I mean, if you could imagine, a lot of these organizations, as an entrepreneur of a few companies myself, it's a lonely job. Doing a lot of this hard graft, and I'm sure you'll know very well, Ross. Having other people, peers, community, people you can look sideways to is hugely important, even if it's just for the shared learning and experience. But to be a little bit more specific, when we're talking about this in terms of financial sustainability, in terms of data and outcomes and evidence, one thing a community of practice becomes particularly useful for is sharing that data and sharing those methodologies. And I think what's also something worth mentioning is another kind of stream of finance that is growing is philanthropy. We recently had an amazing gentleman called Tristan Ace, who's an expert in global partnerships and impact, and has done a lot of work with British Council, now based in Myanmar. And what he enlightened us to our community of practice just last month was how the shifting landscape of foreign aid and kind of traditional forms of investment and grant funding and so on is fundamentally changing. We know this because, and I've got a couple of quite stark stats here, which say that 95%, there's been a 95% of foreign aid decline from just 5 of those foreign aid donors. So we're talking about the USA, the UK, Germany, France, and Japan being some of the largest donors. So that has a fundamental impact on climate action projects that are recipients of grant funding and foreign aid. So then the question becomes, how does that affect the different types of outcomes and the different types of evidence that needs to be gathered in order to reflect new forms of income, and especially when we're thinking about philanthropy? Well, when we start thinking about philanthropy, the narrative, the community, the culture becomes a little bit more kind of important. And let me give an example of this. So if we're thinking about indigenous knowledge and land stewardship, where a lot of climate action might be rooted, traditionally we might defer to science as data and evidence, and of course it's incredibly important and incredibly valid. However, what a lot of these conversations that we've had in the community of practice that have emerged is the importance of the indigenous knowledge. So I'll share some case studies later on. But as a very small example, in China, for example, one of our amazing projects in our community of practice was about working with local farmers to grow grass, because that grass was being lost, and it was having an impact on farming and therefore food produce and sustainability overall. And so Lee's project was about working closely with the indigenous knowledge across generations and really looking at how indigenous knowledge around land stewardship and growth of grass fundamentally can be combined with science and research in order to basically give them better farming conditions. And I guess what it shows you is that communities of practice really dive really deep into that sense of ecological knowledge, which shouldn't be peripheral and should actually be front and center of a lot of this kind of community-based work that we are looking at. So I guess what I'm saying is communities of practice are hugely important for diversity of data and evidence and outcomes related to funding.
Brilliant, Dan. That's fantastic. And we'll talk more about some of those case studies in a few minutes. Just for the audience benefit, we will be opening for questions in about 10 minutes or so. So we've got 8 questions there, and have a look at them, upvote them if you really want them to be asked. And also, if you've got more questions, that'd be fantastic. So let's just look at that final step. So this is the exciting part of scaling a business and organization. So when we look at that, how do we scale that? So Burak, in terms of what are the signs that a venture is ready to scale, and what usually breaks when people scale too early? Because it's a big question, this one.
Yeah, that's the answer to this question is vague, right? Like, meaning there is no right time, but there might be signs of the right time, right? So first of all, whatever your business is, I think you need to have some KPIs. And these KPIs might show you where you're at. So let's say you're focusing on a customer related business, and then retention, for example, is your KPI, right? So whether your retention rate is high or as high as you want to have, right? So things like that you need to consider, first of all, in terms of the business, where you're at. The second thing is, I think, talking with the stakeholders and partners and mentors, right? Because you might feel that your KPIs are at the right point, but then someone else might tell you there's something else you need to work on. Or, right, your customer KPIs are at this point, but maybe your IT part is lagging. So you need to always get that, cross-check, so to say. And then when that also gives you the green sign, I think it is then time to take the risk. And it is okay to take the risk, I think, because you never know whether this will pay off or not. But if you don't take the risk, you'll never know the answer, right? And then in our example, so we grew our platform. It's maybe not the happy ending story, but I want to still explain what it meant for us, that taking that risk and then trying something new. So our platform grew massively in the first 2 years. And then we heard our stakeholders, producers, talking about some, commission issue as well, right? Because some of them were very strong in terms of, producing, and they were asked for very high commissions from big marketplaces. And what we came up with was commission-free marketplace. But then we started competing in an area that was heavily matured, and those giant players were there. And our, idea was novel, and we were providing some great, visibility as well. But at the same time, our trial ended with a failure. But it's okay, right? So we learned what we need to learn, and then we moved on. And then I think it's very important to also understand what you learn, and then when to scale back. And then you can always take the time to scale again, scale more, and then do more when this is the right time. But I think, to summarize, getting the right KPIs, talking with the people that you trust and your stakeholders, and taking the risk and doing, seeing the results at the end, I guess.
Cool. That's really interesting. I picked that phrase of scale back, actually, which is that idea. If the conditions are changed, you can scale back through. So that's cool. Thank you very much for that. Dan, can you mentioned earlier about some case studies as well, but also, why should young founders think about climate opportunities globally rather than just in their own home market?
Well, in our experience of holding space for these 20 incredible organizations, what started to emerge was the best projects are the ones that have local impacts, local knowledge and solutions, but can be applied globally. And those local solutions mean that there will be often niche or addressing a very particular type of environment or issue, but ultimately a quality climate action project strategically, visibly in terms of marketing, but also in terms of its, how it's held and the knowledge at its roots, should be able to travel. And so looking at this in terms of some of our examples, let me just quickly share some pictures so you can have a little bit of context. This right here is a project based in Indonesia. You might be familiar with it. National Geographic and The Atlantic have covered it, called the Sinking Village in Timbos Loco in South Indonesia, I believe. And the data shows that some areas around this place have been sinking at up to 20 centimeters annually. Now, what have we learned from this? Well, this has very much been a project by the community for the community. So rather than necessarily looking at the bottom line, the triple bottom line, however you want to describe it, actually, it was very much rooted in listening at its core. And so at the beginning, they embarked on a participatory mapping phase, which looked at the risks and the priorities of the local community, ultimately to build up a climate risk assessment that was very specific to the local community. And then this led to climate adaptive agriculture, so looking at the water treatment systems, but also combined with a community living lab. So looking at eco education tourism, looking at all of the skills and what needed to happen to develop that community in order to create a blueprint for many, many other communities that are going through very similar plight wherever they are in the world. So this is about strengthening local skills and ultimately long-term ownership to allow partnerships to expand and to allow what would seem like a small local project to think globally. Very quickly, a second example I wanted to share with you is it's another one from Indonesia by coincidence. And this is about revolutionizing local food production by replacing imported soya beans, which we know are under a lot of pressure globally, with cultivated koro or jack beans. Now, interestingly, koro beans has anti-nutritional compounds, which they've managed to successfully eliminate. So we're talking about bridging the gap here between indigenous and scientific knowledge to create an innovative local product rather that could be scalable. What is the impact of this? Well, boosting farmers' incomes, creating new jobs for women, and strengthening local markets. So I think again here we have a really important example of understanding what that local knowledge and complexity looks like, and really speaking to that. But it's quite clear that there is a scalable kind of global facing, outward looking potential for this organization. And then the final thing I'll share, which might be a nice little segue to Yijing, is another one of our projects came from Nigeria, which is EcoWhites, who you may be familiar with. They're doing quite amazing things at the moment. And ultimately, they envisage an Africa, or indeed a world, where clean energy pays for itself. So this isn't, there are other perhaps similar projects, but this one's really interesting because they talk about 600 million people still live without access to electricity, and that energy access is the foundation of economic growth. And so yes, I've shared cultural and community based kind of perspectives, but here we're looking at finance as the biggest barrier and not necessarily eco-technology being the biggest barrier. So ultimately, eco-wise streamline the monetization of environmental commodities. We're talking about carbon credits, we're talking about renewable energy certificates, and how can you monetize the social and climate impact from avoiding emissions using technology that EcoWise have built. So therein lies some really interesting kind of contrasting examples of kind of economic and cultural and community-based reasons why young founders should look globally but start locally.
Thanks, Dan. There's a huge amount of learning that comes out of these communities, these groups, the issues of practice, and that's you're just touching on the surface of it there, which I think was really great examples. So thank you. Just before we move to the questions from the audience, Yijing, what does scaling actually look like in climate in terms of technology scale, market scale, community scale, or policy influence? How does it look? What does it look like?
Yeah, echoing back a little bit from Dan's answer as well. Globalization is actually also a very key part of where all the technologies, climate tech that we actually look into, and it's globally, not just, like the very pure question of climate change is, like it's something that we have to tackle together. And so that's like fundamentally is the place wherever geopolitics is going, like we need collaboration on that one to begin with. But also on the technology front, where we work much more on a daily basis, is also, like 5 years ago, we've seen so many, like also 10 years ago as well, there's different waves of climate tech in terms of from investment perspective. There's different clean tech wave in the funding round where you see a bunch of like VCP capital coming into the space. And then 5 years ago, there was another boom globally. And actually in Europe, there's also a boom of like different climate funds and inaugurated and having their setting up a new funds for that time, and also that happened in China as well. And so we've seen so many different climate technologies over the years. But right now, 5 years later or 6 years later from that kind of peak, many of the technologies are at a scaling phase, and it's at deployment phase. And when we say climate technology, many of the technologies are transition technologies. For instance, these devices and different stage of like the tech piece is trying to transit the most polluted industries, let's say oil, gas, coal, or heavy metal, or like all industrial where most emissions coming from that you can think of, textile, of course, as well, agriculture. And so this is right now like this huge deployment phase is where we are globally. Of course, I'm generalizing the global, but like what we're seeing in many of the regions. And so, first of all, I think for many of the newcomers or fresh graduates getting into the industry, I would recommend to look into deployment opportunities with different climate tech pieces to see whether in your country or region there's possibilities of deployment. That's where like a lot of things are happening actually right now. And then secondly, I think the trans kind of crossing studies and learnings with receiving so many climate entrepreneurs and investors coming to China to learn and also exploring the market as well. We supported a lot of like European companies, climate tech companies, Singapore, Southeast Asia companies coming and landing into Chinese market, and also vice versa. And so there's so much like studies and learning from each other going on in this space. And my last point, going back to the very original question, is how do we actually look like? From investment perspective, it's rather black and white. It's, like on your financial statement, it is quite clear on how much pipelines you're getting, how much client you're getting, how much order you're getting. It's actually very down to the quantifiable numbers. And then it's brutal, but it's very black and white. Like either you're scaling, your numbers look good, or you don't, and then you're stuck. Maybe you're stuck because of the industry cycles, or because of like geopolitics. We know a lot of American climate tech companies was very much stuck when Trump was on. Like a lot of funding froze, and that created a lot of challenges for a lot of companies as well. But so from investment and climate investing and impact investing perspective, scaling looks like you are scaling in the financial terms as well as impact terms, and your solution is being deployed, which means you are reducing much more carbon emission or other kind of methane or other types of gas, and also if you are doing like waste management, then there's other measurement on that side as well. So these are all clear measurement that we can actually measure.
Thank you. And I like that kind of bring us back to reality piece there, which you to take investment, you need to be showing growth and impact. So thank you for that, Yijing. That's really cool. Okay, we're going to move for about 5 minutes or so just for some questions from the Q&A. Thank you to those people that have submitted them. If I can ask my panel to just have a look at those Q&A just to start to familiarize yourself with them. We'll take them from the top down and see how many we go through. And if one of the panel members would like to answer as I read once I've read one. So thank you to Fatima for the first question there. How important are professional networks compared to funding in the early stages of entrepreneurship? And how can young entrepreneurs build meaningful connections? Who would like to pick that up? Lots of claps there for that one. That's a good one to be asked. Anyone would like to pick that one up?
I can go with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
So I think the professional network is pretty important, and obviously it depends where you're at in your professional life, whether you're a young professional or established professional. But it is pretty important to use the network and get to the contacts that you need to get. And we talked about the partnerships, right, for the corporates. So if you have, if you're working on the climate sustainability and you have worked at, for example, at a ECG department at a company, and then you started your own business, it is a great translation again to your network and to talk to them about what you are thinking about, what as a solution, what a proposition, what you can bring to them, and then asking your network to introduce you to new people, new organizations. So I think it's super important. And then the other important thing is, we talked about the alumni network a little bit. I just wanted to give you a sense of how it helped us to scale in the first place very quickly. So I studied at the Middle East Technical University in Turkey for my undergrad. And then one of the food bloggers, very well-known person, was actually a graduate of my university, right? And then what I did was to reach out to her email. I didn't know her at all. And then she responded. And then she agreed that she took the story of us, because we were both, me and my co-founder, were both at the same university. So she supported us. And then the first article came in that first month. And then that really took everything off. And then months later, we were on Walk. And the Walk creator called me, reached out to me after, this reading that piece as well. So you never know what network will bring you. And then it is something that you need to work on.
Yeah, that's really, really well said. That example brings it to life. The importance of network. I always say that networks lead to the other capitals, whether that's human capital, whether that's financial capital. That relationship capital is really, really important. So the next question, and maybe the last one, because we're running slightly short on time. As climate, it's an important one, this one. As climate entrepreneurship becomes increasingly interdisciplinary, how can people from non-traditional backgrounds, such as social sciences or humanities, create meaningful opportunities for themselves in the climate sector? Who would like to pick that one up?
To speak to this. I mean,
Yeah.
this kind of is my life in a way, like this kind of interdisciplinary, kind of non-traditional social sciences background. And I feel both privileged and sometimes, out of my comfort zone being in climate spaces when we're talking about, some of the hard data and the scaling. And whilst I'm an entrepreneur myself, there are there are areas where I'm constantly learning. And I think this is both beautiful. This is a beautiful challenge for everybody here, is to push yourselves into spaces where you feel out of your depth, because that's where you learn the most. And I think, one of the things that's coming out of this conversation is the importance of this kind of holistic view, not only the KPIs and the sustainability and the evidence-based kind of approaches, but also how you hold communities, how you hold culture. For me, I think I think there is an emerging space for people who don't necessarily see themselves traditionally through their studies or their kind of career background in a climate action space. But I'm here to tell you that it's possible and it's important, because ultimately it takes a village to create this change that we need to see both locally and globally. And part of that, and one of the most important things that has emerged from it, is storytelling, community building, content creation. Some of these things that aren't traditionally seen as part of the climate action space are all kind of additional skills that are used to amplify the incredible work that a lot of people are doing. So my takeaway is you can find your space.
And I think that is a great place to pause and thank you and say thank you to all of the panel. Thank you to Yijing, thank you to Burak, and thank you to Dan for sharing your experience and knowledge about a really, really important subject. And really key is that role of entrepreneurship in addressing the climate issues that we face globally. And there's lots of key messaging there about interdisciplinary, about working across communities of practice, etc. And also looking at, let's not label funding and have it sort of competing. Let's see how we can align funding so that it has even greater impact. So thank you to my panelists. I really appreciate your time, preparation, and enthusiasm, and for sharing your knowledge. And I look forward to speaking with you at some point again soon. Just to finish off, I'd like to hand back to Maria at the British Council and just to close the webinar.
Ross, thank you very, very much. And to everyone, thank you very much for staying with us and for being part of today's program. We've now come to the end of our three-session series, which has taken us across some of the most exciting and fast-evolving areas of the green and sustainability space. Quick recap, we began with navigating the green economy, where we explored what the green economy is, where the opportunities are emerging, and how skills and roles are evolving across different sectors. We then moved into careers in climate policy, driving global action, where we looked at how policy shapes climate ambition and the range of pathways into influencing global climate decisions. And finally, to this wonderful session, we heard here on entrepreneurship, innovation, networks, and scaling, which highlighted how ideas can be turned into impact through innovation, collaboration, and enterprise. Across all three sessions, a few common themes, I think, have stood out: the importance of transferable skills, the value of gaining practical experience early, and the many different and often unexpected pathways into sustainability and climate-related careers, and the power of continued learning, as we've just heard. Most importantly, we've seen how diverse experiences and backgrounds are not a barrier, but a real strength in this space. Before we close, I'd also like to highlight the Alumni UK Climate Action Community of Practice that Dan talked about. The wider version of that community of practice will be launched later in the year, September, October, which brings together alumni and professionals with a shared interest in climate and sustainability. We will shortly be opening recruitment for the steering group, and we will also welcome expressions of interest from those who would like to join the community as members. More information is probably available in the links that must have been shared in the chat, or if not there, in the Alumni UK program pages. I would like to extend a sincere thank you to all of our chairs and speakers across the program for sharing their time, expertise, and honest reflections, and for bringing these conversations to life so vividly today. And of course, thank you to all of you who joined us today. Your engagement, your questions, and your curiosity are what makes these sessions truly valuable. Looking ahead, our next Spotlight event will focus on health and life sciences, and it's coming up on the 30th of September. But in the meantime, we also have a number of relevant sessions coming up that may be of interest. On the 9th of July, from our Career Essentials series, we'll be hosting Thrive in Your Career from Day One. On the 16th of September, from the same series, we'll run Utilizing Your Cross-Cultural Experience, exploring how international experience and global perspectives can be turned into a real career advantage. Both sessions are particularly relevant for final year students and recent graduates. We will also be continuing our newly introduced regional focus series with a spotlight on India coming up on the 27th of August, designed to support UK-educated Indian graduates who are returning home and looking to enter the Indian job market. So we hope to see many of you at these upcoming events as we continue to support your career journeys across different sectors and regions. Thank you once again for being with us today, and enjoy the rest of the day.